Okay, thanks. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thanks to everybody who helped put this on, especially Cassandra Quave. So I'm an ethnobotanist with the Amazon Conservation Team. I want to talk about how we've been using an ethnobotanical approach, an ethnobiological approach to help people protect their rainforests, their rivers, and their culture. So we hear a lot of bad news about the Amazon, and that is essentially correct. But there's some good news, there's some exciting news as well. Carolyn Chabu, an entomologist, says we're finding a new species on average every 3 days. Some of the breaking news that doesn't get as much headlines as the bad news is, and I want to talk about what's happened in the last 6 years. We found a coral reef at the mouth of the Amazon. A new species of cobalt blue tarantula in Guyana in 2017. And though most of the new species are little creepy crawlies, imagine a cobalt blue tarantula. That's hard to miss. It just gives you an idea of how much remains to be discovered. Electric eels have been studied since Linnaeus, 1766. It was the electric eels which were the inspiration for Volta's batteries. Now, these are 8-foot-long slabs of meat that shoot out electric charges. These are the Jedi of the Amazon River. However, we found 2 new species a couple of years ago. So if you can find new species of something this obvious, imagine what is still out there remaining to be discovered. And one last example, just south of where I work in the Northeast Amazon, we found the tallest tree in the rainforest. How much taller was it? 88 feet, taller than any tree known in the Amazon. Now, we live in a world where records are broken by a millisecond or a millimeter. When Bob Beamon broke the long jump record at the Olympics in 1968 by 20 inches, Sports Illustrated declared this one of the 5 greatest sports events of the 20th century. 20 inches, 88 feet. Now, we think of the biggest tree in the Amazon as a capac tree you see here, but it's a Denizia, it's a legume. And I'm very glad to see here at this meeting and in ethnobotany in general, the focus is how we use this knowledge, how we use this relationship with local peoples to help people. First and foremost, the tribal people, the peasant peoples we work with, but ultimately helping ourselves as well. This is part of the Rockefeller Initiative. Seen here, Selena, Gary Nabhan, and John De La Parra, who's here, coming up on a new way to improve food availability for everyone. Now, this is where I got my start. September 1974, I wandered to the Botanical Museum in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and encountered this man, Richard Evans Schultes, who became my mentor and was an inspiration to many of us here. When you walked into Schultes' office, over one shoulder, you saw this picture on the left, the Yukuna peoples doing the Baile de Muñeca, and on the right, you saw Chiribiquete. The point being, it was culture and nature, nature and culture. And that was the inspiration for our biocultural approach. But Schultes, no matter how much you know about the man, he's more amazing than what you know. In 1936, he went to Oklahoma to study peyote use amongst the Kiowa. And in so doing, he helped bring mescaline to the outside world. And Schultes always said, ethnobotanists don't discover anything. We learn from our guides and our teachers who are indigenous peoples. In 1938, to do his PhD work, he went to the Mazatec in southern Mexico, in Oaxaca. Rumors of magic mushrooms, which had never been documented outside of Siberia. And sure enough, his Mazatec teachers taught him about magic mushrooms. And in so doing, these are the actual specimens, in so doing, he brought psilocybin to the outside world. In 1941, with his PhD in hand, he went to Colombia to spend 14 years in the Northwest Amazon. And in the Sibundoy Valley in the Colombian Amazon, Salvador Chindoy, seen here at the left, taught him ayahuasca. So consider, in 1936, he helped bring mescaline to the outside world. In 1938, he helped to bring psilocybin to the outside world. In 1941, he helped bring ayahuasca to the outside world. These are the 5 greatest years in the history of ethnobotany, 1936 to 1941. So this is the picture that changed my life. I was in a night school course and Schultes said, here you see 3 Yukuna Indians doing the Kayari dance to propitiate forest spirits and keep away the forces of darkness. The one on the right has a Harvard degree. Looking at this image, I fell in love with indigenous peoples and the rainforest and their medicinal plants. This is detailed in great detail in our Schulte storybook map, which retraces his life and times. On our website, I have a bookmark here with the SR code so you can connect and see more of this. It's really quite a wonderful odyssey. I also cover much of this stuff in my podcast, Plants of the Gods, Hallucinogens, Healing, Culture, and Conservation. Will hit 1 million downloads by the end of this year. So what I learned from Schultes is that ethnobotany is a contact sport, meaning it's not just that you were there, it's how you were there. So when I got to the first Yanomami Maloka and the shaman pointed the snuff pipe in my direction, I knew exactly what to do with it. As ethnobotanists, this is part of our job. So this is me with one of my other mentors, Yalawifa, the great shaman of the Trio tribe on the Suriname-Brazil border. This is 1982, right when I was getting started. And what I learned from Schultes is that ethnobotany is all about relationships. So this picture is 1982. Here you see the same guys still at it over 30 years later. We're still working together. And this picture taken by Bruce Hoffman. And Bruce Hoffman, raise your hand, Bruce. Bruce Hoffman is speaking the next couple of days, so I want to make sure everybody attends his talk as well. Now, when the trios wanted to get title to their lands, they went to the central government. The central government said, where's your map? Now, the trios at this point had never seen a map. So when they were shown the map, my friend Wuta of the Trio tribe and my friend Kang of the YY people went off into the jungle with a piece of butcher paper and made this hand-drawn map. They then asked us to upgrade it, and we started working with them in the year 2000, brought in GPSs to help them map their lands. Now, what I want you to pay attention to in this picture is the semiotics of it, okay? Who's making the map? It's not the ACT cartographer at the top, it's the trio with the GPS in his hand. And for me, this really is emblematic of the approach we take to ethnobotany at the Amazon Conservation Team. We don't do the work. We're not driving the car. We're riding shotgun. We're there to train, help, encourage, and fund. And that's what you see in this picture, which is the perfect marriage of ancient shamanic wisdom and 21st century technology. So the indigenous peoples went off and made the map and collected the data. And this is what we ended up with. Some of these maps have over 1,000 items on them, which previously was all in their heads. Now it's on the computer, and now it's down on paper. The detail is fantastic, and when you click on the legend, or you click on some of these symbols, stories pop up, explanations of the medicinal plants, legends of how the waterfall got its name. But our approach is called Map, Manage, Protect. A map is a valuable tool, but not an end in itself. So you need to turn the map into a management plan, and here you see the trio cartographers doing just that. And here's the management plan. It's based on work we did with indigenous peoples in the Colombian Amazon, which they call the Plan de Vida, the life plan. But it's essentially a management plan, not just for the forest, not just for the river, but for the culture as well. But you have a management plan. How are you going to implement it? You need to protect, map, manage, protect. These are indigenous park guards who set up park guard posts at the borders of the territory. Now, it's very easy for an NGO, a non-government organization, to go into a tribal village, put everybody in their t-shirts, take their picture, and put it on their website saying, we're working in partnership, or we're doing this project with solar panels. This has been running for 12 years in the rainforest. That is proof of concept. And not only did we start with one sub-tribe of indigenous peoples in one corner of a forgotten little country like Suriname, we have now done this with over 100 tribal groups throughout Amazonia and other parts of South America, map, manage, and improve protection of over 90 million acres of ancestral rainforest. And again, ethnobotany can be used to build bridges. This is Johannes, a Saramacano Maroon from central Suriname. Now, the Maroons are descendants of escaped slaves who set up West African tribal lifestyles in central Suriname. And here's how we built bridges. On the left, you see 3 trio Indians in traditional dress with the guy in the white shirt. That's Kang. He's a YY from a different tribe, different group. And on the right, you see Ken teaching the Matawai Maroons how to use a GPS to map their lands. And this is one of the most favorite pictures that's ever come out of our 26 years of work. we're doing a mapping project with the Matawai peoples. On the left is Minu, the director of our Suriname program, who is a descendant of Hindustani immigrants to Suriname. And she's explaining this to the descendants of African slaves in the middle of the Amazon forest. You got the whole tropics here. You got the Amazon, you've got Afro-Americans, and you've got Hindustani Surinamers. But here's what we learned in the course of this mapping project. Women hold a different landscape in their heads. Much of this work with tribal peoples is with the men. That's not sufficient, but it often takes years, if not decades, to gain enough trust to be able to work with the women. Okay, so when we started doing the map, we started with the men, but we learned the women complement the men's knowledge, and much of our efforts are focused on the women. This is deeply intentional and nuanced work that can't be done in a hurry. And this resulted in this storybook map, which is on our website, Lands of Freedom, which I think is one of the most moving and important pieces of Afro-American history ever created. And we're only able to do this because the level of trust and friendship and love we created with the Maroons by working with them so long to empower them to protect their rainforest, their river, and their culture. I'm trying to raise money to start a program to help Afro-Amazonians. We hear a lot about the Native Americans, the First Peoples. We hear a lot about the Campesinos, the Caboclos. Who's helping the Afro-Amazonians? Okay, that is an unfilled niche. Other work is basic biology. This is one of the most important works to ever come out of the Amazon. This is a 15-year project, labor of love, by Bruce Hoffman, Lianas of the Guianas, covering the whole of the Northeast Amazon. Everybody here should have this book on their shelf. It's a work of science and it's a work of art. Again, to help peoples, we focus on non-timber forest products, the classic one being tuha, Brazil nuts. In the course of mapping, we found 13 stands of Brazil nuts. But here's a cool thing. We're not just talking ethnobotany, we're talking ethnoapiology. This is my friend Pone. Pone is an Akurio. They were the last hunter-gatherer tribe of Suriname. When they were first contacted 40 years ago, they didn't have metal tools. Here you see Pone making a stone axe. They didn't know how to make fire. They had to carry it with them. If you want to say in Akurio, he's died, you say his fire has gone out. But they know the forest better than anyone. The Akurios have 35 words for honey. So when you want to develop a project based on bees and producing honey, you don't go to the trios, you go to the Akurios. And so here's Bruce working with the local peoples on the left to document the knowledge of bees. On the right, you see Ayrton Valletta, Brazilian ethnoapiologist, along with Ken, the YY cartographer, to document this knowledge and create a program. So all told, between the trios and the Akurios, we came up with about 40 different types of bees, narrowed it down to 80 that are stingless, produce the most honey, produce the best honey. And it's the marriage, remember, as I said, of indigenous wisdom and Western knowledge. So we introduced bee boxes, all right? And now they have 2 non-timber forest products to sell in the capital city, propolis and tamaga honey. Also, fungi. Indigenous peoples in this part of the Amazon know very little about fungi and use even less. But by bringing in Daniel Winkler, this great mycologist, we're able to identify fungi that are edible, they're chanterelles in the Amazon, and identify fungi that are medicinal, turkey tail and many others. This is, of course, cordyceps. So again, bringing in that Western expertise to complement the local knowledge is the way to go. Also, again, focusing on the women. Instead of trying to bring in weird things like durians that they don't know and don't grow, we focused on intensifying local agriculture to produce products for the market. The trios produce this superb chili powder where they grow the chilies and then they dry them and then they smoke them and then they powder them. So here you see the first stage of the process. Again, this is done by the women for the women. Also, ethnoeducation. A lot of it is about helping the kids learn about the old ways, because you go into these villages and if they have a school, it's been set up by the missionaries and they're teaching about cows, pigs, and Jesus. Limited utility for sustainable development in the rainforest. So we want them to learn their own legends, their own music, their own handicrafts, and their own medicinal plants above and beyond everything else. We've also set up Shaman's Apprentice clinics. We have 4 of them running in the Northeast Amazon, where the traditional practitioners are practicing traditional medicine, to pass the knowledge on to the next generation, but also to make sure that this ethnomedicine is a living, breathing custom. You can't teach ethnomedicine by just making a list of medicinal plants. It has to be a living, breathing practice. And here's a centerpiece, the Shaman's Apprentice book. And before anybody accuses us of IPR issues, look inside. It's all in Trio. Okay. Name of the plant, no scientific names, where it's found, where it grows, what type of soil it likes, what diseases it treats, how to prepare it, and the dosage. Remember that the only book they'd ever seen in their language prior to this was the Bible, provided by fundamentalist missionaries. And so let me conclude where I started with my mentor, Schultes. This is Schultes in Chiribiquete in the Northwest Amazon. Look at that crack in the middle of the picture in that rock. Here's the same shot, same mountain, Cerro Campana, the Bell Mountain. I took this just a few years ago. Chiribiquete is not only a wellspring of biodiversity, but it is home to the greatest collection of pre-Columbian paintings, thousands and thousands and thousands of paintings, very few of which have ever been documented, and 3 tribes of uncontacted peoples. We estimate there's 70 tribes of uncontacted peoples in the Amazon, primarily in the Northwest Amazon, where Brazil, Colombia, and Peru come together. And we have worked closely with the contacted tribes and with the Colombian government to protect them. So in, I think, 1987, Schultes and Indirena, the Colombian National Parks Department, set up Chiribiquete as a national park. He'd spent 40 years trying to convince the Colombians to set this up as a national park. It took 4 decades, but he did it. In 2012, we worked with the Parks Department, now known as Parques, to expand it. And again, this is with 2 indigenous groups to the south. This is not a national park. These are indigenous reserves serving as a buffer zone. And then once again, Chiribiquete today is the largest national park in the tropical world. It's twice the size of Massachusetts, protecting all sorts of species which are endangered or extinguished elsewhere, like the jaguar and the harpy eagle, the pre-Columbian paintings, and the 3 tribes of uncontacted peoples. So if you believe that better stewardship of nature is both a scientific and a sacred duty, then Schultes lives. If you believe, like I do, that Mother Nature is an almost inexhaustible source of both wonder and healing, then Schultes lives. If you believe in the importance of protecting nature and doing so in true partnership with our indigenous colleagues, then Schultes lives, and so does Ethnobotany. Thank you very much. So we have time for a few questions. And the stuff on the Amazon is in my most recent book, The Amazon, What Everybody Needs to Know. And I'm supposed to give some advice to people that want to write for the public. Here's the most important piece of advice. Don't bring out a book during a pandemic. So also, I have some bookmarks which have QR codes which connect to our website and the podcast. So you can figure that out. So you can help me with the questions.
One question. I had a friend that came back from Colombia, and he brought with him.
Can you say that a little closer?
I have a friend who came back from Colombia, and he brought with him a jam-looking substance that he claims that he collected from a genus called Tratanikia. And it was a beautiful Tratanikia.
A gem-looking substance?
Uh-huh.
From
what species?
a genus called Tratanikia.
A genus called Tratanikia?
I don't know it.
You don't know it? It's a resin. And what he claims happened when he was collecting the resin from the tree was
Bill, you
that
wanna address this?
It's resin at the bottom of the tree.
Is it Hymenea? What's the genus? Oh yeah, it's a Burseraceae. Burseraceae is the family that frankincense comes
Yeah.
from, I believe. And when the first Catholics got to French Guiana, they built churches and they wanted to have incense. And the indigenous people showed them that this family had a sweet smell. Indeed, it was the same one that they'd actually been using back in the old country. And it's used for a variety of purposes. In the Northeast Amazon, where I do most of my work, it's Hymenea, which is used for all sorts of things, which is actually a legume, but there's many aromatic resins of which the Burseraceae are predominant in terms of using for a variety of internal
skin as
ailments.
well.
And it's just burned because it smells good. Some people burn it and they say it keeps away mosquitoes.
I did a little bit of chemistry work on it, but the person who collected it for me claims that whilst collecting the resin from the tree, it became really hot. And I've only heard that from one person.
Someone collecting the resin claimed that when they were collecting it, it became really hot.
I've never seen or heard that.
Yeah.
So let's give some other folks a chance. Any other questions?
Hello. I worked on a similar mapping project with northern communities in northern Quebec, indigenous communities in northern Quebec, sorry. And in some cases, some indigenous groups were reluctant or completely refused to map certain areas that had cultural value for fear of, and as you mentioned, it takes a long time to gain the trust and so on. But some were really firm about not sharing certain aspects of the territory because they were afraid that what would happen with that information. So I was wondering if you encountered any similar like reluctance basically with tribes that just or that sometimes they would say yes, but they would keep certain information off the map, for example.
So people in northern Quebec were reluctant to share information about their territories. And did you encounter any of that in your mapping?
Yeah, I think that all of us know that you only want to work or visit places you're invited in. And then sometimes they are very anxious to tell you stuff, and sometimes it's none of your business. And we have to be comfortable with that. So in the work that we've done, as I said, we've worked with over 100 groups, but always by invitation. And that's the way it should be done. I mean, you don't want somebody showing up at your house you didn't invite. Why should this be any different? You want to make intellectual property rights simple? It's good manners. Okay, somebody's helping you. What are you going to do for them? And I think that's the attitude that we should all carry in ethnobotany in our daily lives. And so this is what I mean when I say it doesn't matter that you're there, it matters how you were there. All of us have skills that many of our indigenous colleagues don't have. So I think that when you show up in an indigenous village, you should be showing up thinking, how can I help these people while I'm here collecting information that I want to learn for my personal benefit or treatment for my personal health or to get my PhD. And that's the attitude that has to be first and foremost. Okay, one or two more questions.
Hello, that was an awesome talk. Thank you. Yes, your mapping activities were really very interesting to me. And I was listening and thinking about it along the lens of some people perceive their environments differently. Like there are those who are more auditory, you know, in learning or sensing their landscape or visual. So thinking about the mapping activity, I was wondering how you came up with that. Why map? Why I know it's very effective, right? I mean, it's amazing, but why do we have to map it? I mean, I don't know how they perceive their environment. That's why I'm asking how you came up with that, and how was the resistance, if like, was there resistance at all if like they would be learning their environment in a different way?
You know, Janice Alcorn, a fellow ethnobotanist, said more land has been claimed with maps than with bullets and swords. a more scatological description is that mapping is how people claim their lands, unlike dogs. So mapping works on many different levels. And let me tell you a story about how we got started. Okay, the government said to the chief, if you want title to your lands, we need a map. So the chief told me, I've asked everybody, I've asked the government, I've asked other organizations for help with this mapping. And the Amazon conservation team is the only one that said that they would help us. So I said, we will. And he said, so you'll make us a map? And I said, no, we won't. And he said, but you said you're going to help us. And I said, we will. And he said, so you'll make us a map? And I said, no, we won't. And he said, I'm confused. I said, we will help you. We won't make a map. We'll teach you to make a map, which is a bit of bravado because we didn't know anything about mapping. So I went and found a group called the Center for Native Lands, whose expertise was helping indigenous people map their lands. And then we worked in partnership with them. We then brought Google Earth to the Amazon. So we're always trying to upgrade. Every map we make should cost less and be a better map. We live in a world where every tree in the world eventually will be mapped. But it has to be done in partnership with these guys. I'll give you an example. I was out hunting with one of my friends, Kamanya, and we crossed a creek and it glittered with gold. Okay, Sutter's Mill must have looked the same way. And I looked down and I said, oh my God, is that what I think it is? And he said, uh-huh. And I said, we won't put that on the map, right? And he goes, no, we won't put that on the map. We're working with the Kamayurap people in the Xingu. You saw that nice picture of all the guys in tribal dress holding up the thing. That's the Xingu, 14 tribes there. And so they're making the legend. And I said, what's this? And the chief said, oh, that's a two-headed black invisible jaguar. And I said, have you ever seen one? He said, no, stupid, they're invisible. Oh, okay, it's your map. But the two-headed black invisible jaguar lived in the headwaters and you couldn't go there, which if you think about it, it's a pretty profound ecological thinking that this is where you don't go, you don't muck with the headwaters. And they said, that's because the two-headed invisible black jaguar lives there. I'm cool with that. You're protecting the headwaters. And this is a problem with a lot of conservation projects where you don't protect the headwaters. Bad stuff happens there. And no matter what you do downstream, it's kind of screwed up. So this is where it comes to the point where I said, we're riding shotgun. We're not driving the car. They are. We're there giving them advice, tools, training, encouragement, and funding. And this is how mapping should be done. And I think every indigenous community in the world should have their own map because it not only connects the younger generation to the ancestors, but it introduces technology in a way which supports the culture instead of destroys it. Because with another group in the Xingu, there was this one old man who sat there the whole time smoking one of these big honking shamanic cigars, never said anything, completely naked, painted red with achiote paste. And they couldn't figure out the course of this river because it was very cloudy because it's a lot of rainforest. And finally, on like the third day, Grandpa went up and said, it goes like this, and then it goes like this, and then it goes like this, and then it goes like this. And a week later, when the clouds cleared and we got an aerial picture, he was absolutely right. So this old guy who was sort of old fashioned and sort of forgotten turned out to be the cartographic genius that nobody knew. And it was only through the mapping process that they got to see that these old guys and these old gals really know a lot of stuff that they don't. And it's captured now on paper and on computer because of this mapping process. Other questions before we wrap up?
Hi, thank you so much. So my question is based on an anecdotal observation that I've made, so take it with a grain of salt. But that comment you made just spurred a thought for me, which is that when you transition from something like an oral tradition to have something on paper, I feel like I see this with my students. If I can just Google something, I don't have to remember it because it's always going to be on the internet. So are there any downsides to mapping other than intellectual property that you can see? If it is kind of an oral tradition, maybe there's more investment in really retaining the information. I don't know if that's true. I'm just curious if you see any downsides.
I'm not stupid enough to say there are no downsides. I can say I haven't seen downsides, and people have made the case that, well, if you map it, they know where the indigenous territory runs out, so they can start getting logging concessions all around it. And one of the ways we've dealt with that is we just kind of left the borders sort of vague. But everybody here has had experiences where they thought they were doing good or thought they made the right decision. They didn't. So I'm not going to say there's no downside to it, but the positives are insane, because you not only end up with a map, you end up with a teaching tool, you end up with a technology exchange process, you connect the young and the old. So the positives are incredible. But to a deeper point, I was in Leticia in the Colombian Amazon with a journalist, and we were interviewing this old shaman. And the shaman finally turned to the journalist and said, "Can you just shut up and chew coca? Let's just be." So this goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's not just that you were there, it's how you were there. He said, "You know what the problem with writing stuff down is?" He said, "When people start to write stuff down, people start to forget." Now think of the Quran. There are people that memorize the whole Quran. Okay, the Odyssey and the Iliad, they weren't written down by Homer. That was oral. So yes, when we write stuff down, we lose our ability. When we stop being hunters and gatherers, we lose visual acuity and our sense of smell and our sense of hearing. So yeah, there are definitely trade-offs involved, but we live in a world where modernity is pressing into these cultures from all sides. And the question is, what tools can we bring to the table to help these people have enough breathing space to make their own decisions? It's not us saying what you should do, what you shouldn't do. You should wear traditional dress, you shouldn't wear traditional dress. You decide. Let's give them the breathing space so their culture is not overrun by loggers and narcos and fundamentalist missionaries, and they can think for themselves. Our job as ethnobiologists is to prepare them to deal with the outside world on their own terms, not to tell them what to do and what not to do. Sorry to preach, but that's my fervent belief. And so I find it very frustrating when I come to meetings with fellow ethnobiologists and I hear, well, there's no jobs. Okay. The psilocybin industry is billions of dollars. Okay. Cannabis as a legal crop is between 9 and 11 in the US. As a legal and illegal crop, it's number 2, second only to corn. So people have their parents, and my parents did this, say you got to go to law school or you got to go to medical school. I know lots of people leaving medicine because the system is so screwed up. Law firms get bought out and people get forced out. There's no guarantees. As an ethnobiologist, you got to know something about people, psychology, economics, botany, language, culture. What better preparation for facing an outside world at a rate of change that our species has never experienced before? So we are the tip of the spear, whether it comes for searching for new treatments for drug-resistant bacteria, like Cassandra Cueve is doing here in Emory, or dealing with climate change, or looking for new medicines from nature, or looking for new foodstuffs from nature, or looking for new biodegradable pesticides from nature. It's us and our indigenous teachers. Thank you very much.